Today's video covers the main Cyborg 009 entries. My goal is to determine which versions are still enjoyable, convey their respective pros and cons, and provide a recommended watch order while remaining spoiler-free. I'll save time by introducing the story with a review of its original manga, since the basics echo throughout subsequent entries. It's set on a semi-realistic 1960s Earth during the Cold War. As the world looked towards space, a secret organization was far ahead with the production of cyborgs capable of dominating land, air, sea, and space. Black Ghost agents search the globe for test subjects who won't be missed. 9 forlorn individuals had their humanity ripped away in exchange for becoming tools of mass destruction. Fortunately, one of their creators, Professor Gilmore, realized the error of his ways and aided the cyborgs in escaping. The plot revolves around these 10 heroes and their struggles against evil and bittersweet memories from their past lives. I haven't read many 1960s manga, but I was impressed by the maturity of its first third. If you're a fan of Gundam's anti-war messages or the existentialism of Ghost in the Shell, there's a strong chance they were inspired by Cyborg 009. Additionally, the cyborgs' backstories were just as tragic. For example, 005 is a Native American disgusted by the treatment of his people, and Cyborg 004 lost his fiancée while attempting to escape East Germany. Although their past are riddled with trauma, their present isn't easier as they face legions of machines, genetically modified beasts, and several newer model cyborgs. Considering the Cyborg sequential production, each model is an upgrade over its predecessor. The same is true for the newer model antagonists. They're like bosses who outclass our heroes, pushing them to their limits and requiring teamwork and strategy. However, because they're cyborgs, they too have tragic backstories of how they were manipulated or forced to become weapons. With this degree of development, I cared just as much for the minor antagonists as I did for the main characters, but unfortunately the same can't be said for its overarching one-note villains bent on world domination. So despite being shallow for symbolic reasons, it's still a low point spanning most 009 entries. If this sounds impressive, that's only the first 5 volumes, and there's many more. I only began the manga to understand the 1960s anime better because it's hard to follow and only 16 episodes are translated. As a result, I only read the first 55 chapters, containing its original conclusion and the beginning of its continuation. Supposedly, people didn't care for its bittersweet, somewhat ambiguous ending, so he eventually continued the story. I enjoyed the first few volumes without the context of future adaptations. Still, I gradually lost interest as the plot switched from war and drama to mythology and random episodic chapters injected mid-arc. However, I enjoyed the art as he did a great job shading and illustrating giant beasts and machines. Shame to say, but I also got a few chuckles out of them brutalizing genetically modified cybernetic animals. I don't think I've ever seen anyone beat up a bunch of dolphins before. Their racially insensitive character designs are at the forefront of making the manga feel dated. I can't explain why they look this way other than benign ignorance, because from my perspective, they're all respected within the story. Unfortunately, that excludes 006, a starving Chinese farmer contemplating suicide. That's the most development he gets throughout the franchise. He remains a static comedic character, only receiving 2 sentimental episodes in the 2001 entry. Even 001, the baby sleeping for half the series, is further developed. The worst design is 008, who debuts in blackface. Ironically, it felt like Ishinomori was trying to make a statement about understanding and respecting different cultures, as this was the first manga to include a multicultural cast. This issue is exacerbated by groups of animators continuously getting it wrong until about 2001. It's a shame because 008 gets about as much developmental content across the franchise as everyone else, except 006. He fights against slavery and is a freedom fighter alongside his childhood friends. Even in later adaptations, he remains humble, helping these communities despite his global responsibilities. While I appreciated their efforts to flesh out nearly every character, it's clear that 009 is the main character, with 003 coming in second as his love interest. This is especially clear in the 60s adaptation, which treats everyone else like tertiary characters. One who sadly wasn't ignored was 007, who was altered to become a child. It's disappointing because his character offered so much more in the manga. He was an intelligent and skilled British actor who's down on his luck and became an alcoholic. He was even quoting Hamlet from memory. Thankfully, this change was exclusive to the 60s adaptation, as he had some emotional solo episodes in later installments. Ironically, the manga humored his change for one chapter. They said, "This is how he looks from now on," and thankfully, he never looked like that again. This alteration was one of many liberties the 60s adaptations took. They also changed how Skull looked and removed many real war undertones. To my surprise, they kept the off-brand neo-Nazis and added kamikaze pilots. It's hard to make a solid recommendation of the 60s adaptations aside from the first movie. I enjoyed its fairly accurate portrayal of the action scenes from the manga, my favorite being when 009 got into a dogfight while piloting a wing-bladed jet, allowing him to slice his enemies in half. The movie was well animated for its time, and I enjoyed its experimental color palette, despite them changing everyone's outfit from red to purple. Unfortunately, I found its second movie far less enjoyable. It's slower paced, its action scenes were less intense, and its story was hard for me to follow since I watched the anime before the manga. The 1968 TV series continues from where the films left off, but it's basically a ground beef adaptation. Its plot jumps all around the manga while filling large gaps with episodic non-canon intrigue. Ironically, it's these original episodes I preferred. One episode featured a guy altered into a cyborg after the world believed he died in an accident. He's struggling with the pressure of living without his lover because he's bound to a death machine and forced to do his master's bidding. There's a decent amount of episodes depicting the tragic stories of innocent bystanders affected by Black Ghost, but I honestly enjoyed few. Its quirkiness and visual aesthetics feel closer to mid-60s series such as Big X and Tetsujin 28. Still, it comes a year after Mach Go 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 and Ribbon no Kishi, which I thought were better produced. Thankfully, the 1979 sequel was a vast improvement. While it's not the best entry point, there's enough exposition and backstories to be enjoyable if you have the context provided by this video. It also takes the nonsensical fights and episodic dramas to a higher level by implementing arcs and including the most solo developmental episodes out of the entire franchise. Every few episodes, we get one focusing on each character's past life. One of my favorites followed 002 and his old New York gang buddies after a war breaks out. He's generally a tough guy with a short temper, but we learn of his emotional side as he struggles with his new existence and leaving everyone he loves behind. Old wounds are reopened as his past lover is now together with his best friend. Of course, problems escalate beyond the abilities of a street gang, creating a reality check for Jet. The cyborgs may have extraordinary abilities, but at the cost of being violated and stripped of their humanity. As a result, they feel immense shame for their bodies, making them reluctant to reveal the truth to their old friends. All they have now is their duty and each other, a lesson they repeatedly learn. This inability to connect with anyone attracts the cyborgs closer, creating numerous heartfelt bonding moments. I enjoyed the subtle closeness between 009 and 003. They share so much pain, yet they're reassured and comforted by each other. In terms of its action, its arc-oriented plot introduces waves of villains typically dealing with spirituality. Still, they also throw in some neo-Nazi wheelchair battles or pitting the Red Hulk against various animals for good measure. It feels like a distant cousin of Saint Seiya and Fist of the North Star because of its godlike villains and intermittent bystanders with tragic stories. If you're into Norse mythology, there's Thor, Odin, and the Giants of Jotunheim, which made for some pretty epic battles for its time. Oddly, I found its final arc the most interesting out of the entire franchise. It's the only one that creates lore around the main antagonists, giving them development by exploring their backstory and including a few unexpected events. Plus, their designs are pretty cool because they look like evil monks. Overall, I had the most fun with the 70s adaptation. Its fights were enjoyable, a nice blend between wacky and serious. It's loaded with emotional episodes fleshing out our heroes' backstories or the tragic lives of the innocent. I loved its coarsely brushed artwork, bringing its characters and environments to life. It's also got my favorite opening of the franchise. Along with the previous entry, the 1980 movie features some of the best art, animation, and picture quality in the franchise. What can I say? I love remastered cell animation with its attention to detail and creativity with alien worlds, ancient ruins, architecture, and technology. The story follows our heroes on their intergalactic quest to overthrow a space tyrant. Unfortunately, its pacing also felt like space travel because it takes forever for something to happen. The movie is over 2 hours long. They're informed of the main issue 15 minutes in, disembark at 40 minutes, and arrive at the 1 hour mark. Sure, there's a dramatic subplot, semi-suspenseful climax, and maybe one good fight, but by the time something happened, I was too bored to care. This could have been much better if they trimmed it down by about 30 to 40 minutes. I also thought it was funny how heavily Star Trek Movie 1 from 1979 influenced their warp speed physics. I mean, it's pretty blatant. There wouldn't be another 009 entry for 20 years, but at least the 2001 installment is the most well-rounded and the perfect starting point for beginners. The Cyborg Soldier is almost the best of everything the franchise offers. It's got a solid introduction, backstories, tragic minor antagonists, bittersweet solo development episodes, heartwarming bonding, and exciting action. They took some liberties with hero backgrounds, like 009 is still an orphan, but instead of resulting in crime, he's taken in by an orphanage and eventually blamed for the murder of his adoptive father. There are fewer solo development episodes than in 1979, but the ones that we get are far more emotionally powerful than its predecessor, in my opinion. I love the episode where 009 gets trapped in his overclock mode. His body operates at such a high speed that he lives about 10 days within a single moment. It occurs as a subconscious reaction to hearing an explosion over a mile away while he was undergoing maintenance. He spends these days suffering from loneliness and the overwhelming stress of being unable to do anything to save these people's lives. Anything he touches is instantly destroyed due to incalculable G-forces and atmospheric friction. It's one of the most emotional episodes in the anime, but it's also an intriguing puzzle. Another favorite was one of 004's developmental episodes depicting his struggles with holding on to his humanity in a body that can be taken apart. If you're a fan of Ghost in the Shell or Raiden's internal struggles in Metal Gear Solid 4, this episode has a lot in common, and you really feel for Albert as a character. Everyone in 2001 has episodes like this, except 006. He has 2 sentimental episodes, but he's far from being taken seriously. I think Cyborg Soldier features the best action in the franchise because its animation style is better suited for depicting speed, particle effects, environmental destruction, and many enemies on screen. However, it's not just the animation techniques that elevate combat, it's the strength of their opponents. The 2001 anime plays up to the fact that these cyborgs are outdated models, so they're dramatically outclassed by their enemies. The only way they're able to win is through teamwork and strategy. I appreciated how 2001 cohesively wrote the mythology arc within the scope of its narrative, or maybe I'm just accustomed to it by now since I've already seen this sort of thing in previous entries. Either way, it's an entire arc that does a great job characterizing its antagonists to make you understand them. I wish the same could be said about its primary antagonists, Skull and Black Ghost. I don't think I'm asking too much by wanting them to be at least 20% as detailed as the rest of the cast, since they're the catalyst for all the previous emotional investments. Unfortunately, they could have handled the last 5 minutes of episode 48 better. It's the conclusion of the Black Ghost arc, and it felt a little rushed, yet it's still a far better conclusion than what follows. You're actually best off stopping when the credits begin and ignoring the remaining episodes, as they're under a totally different context. The last 2 episodes begin the God's War arc, inspired by incomplete notes left by its creator, the late Ishinomori. It's supposed to be the conclusion to his life's work, but with 2 episodes and a third arriving 2 years later, it's just an incomplete project that barely gets an introduction. However, the God's War arc eventually received a 5-volume manga in 2012, what I like to call the beginning of the Cyborg 009 Dark Ages. I won't go into detail about these entries because I don't recommend them and I have little positive to say. The God's War manga was written by Ishinomori's son Joe Onodera, using his notes after his death. It's the greatest example of how poorly an idea can transition from one person to another. I want to assume good intentions, but it feels like he either wrote it when he was 10 or ruined it out of spite. The 009 characters have developed for 50 years, and his son decides to mutilate everyone graphically. Their bodies are torn apart by monsters in a bloodbath, resulting in them being traumatized by losing more of their humanity. This causes some members to commit self-harm on screen and in great detail. He splits up 50-year love interest and wrote them into separate relationships. He even added body horror and giant Jesus and Buddha as enemies. I found this to be disgusting, shameful, and upsetting. I only began this journey 2 weeks ago, so I can't imagine how upset Lifetime fans were. Between 2012 and 2016, the franchise received 6 new anime, 4 from Production IG. My only positive is that the special effects are cool. They're not terrible, but they're so low on the priority list that their inclusion would be extraneous information. After all, there are many other 009 manga and light novels I chose not to include due to lack of importance or translation. The other 2 are Cyborg 009 vs. Devilman and 009-1. I haven't seen these 2 since one is a crossover with the franchise I'll be covering later this year. The other is a standalone story set in an alternate universe, so both deserve separate reviews. The following chart depicts the 009 entries in order of priority. It's not a watch order list because the most important entries are standalone, so feel free to stop whenever you want. 2001 takes the highest priority since it's the most well-rounded and complete. 1979 comes in second. There's not much of an introduction, but there's enough context for Cell purists to enjoy, and it's also worth watching after 2001 as high-quality bonus content. The 1980 movie comes in third, mostly because it's beautiful and has good fights. Lastly and fourth is the manga. While the 2001 adaptation is a dramatic improvement, diehard fans may appreciate the original experience, considering the manga continues further than 2001, going into the content the 1960s TV series attempted to adapt. The remaining entries are tied since their contributions to your experience are equally low. Overall, Cyborg 009, 2001, and 1979 brought me so many joyful, exciting, and emotional moments that I'm surprised they're not more popular, especially considering the respective quality and the manga's influence throughout the history of anime. I recommend everyone to check it out and tell your friends. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more spoiler-free anime reviews. Thanks to patrons listed here for supporting these videos, and I'll see you soon with Yusha Dagwan.